Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all today. My name is Marty Daly, and I will be helping to moderate our first ever Making the Shift Awards ceremony. Now, I won't be telling you who the winners are, but I do get to hype you up, and I am very excited to do so. So, even though I can't see you and you can see me, I assume that you are all smiling and very excited on the other side of our screens. I've been involved with Making the Shift Scholars with Lived Experience Network for the past year or so, and as part of that role, I get to do cool stuff like this sometimes, and guess what? They keep letting me do it. So to get us started in the right mood, I'd like to take us through a land acknowledgement, and then I'll give a little bit more rising action before we announce who our winners are. I'm not sure where our audience is from this afternoon, but if you know which land you're situated on, I invite you to put it into the chat box and take a moment to reflect on what that knowledge means to you. And if you don't know which traditional lands you're on, I gently nudge you to take a few minutes to find out. We do these land acknowledgements in recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples, to challenge ourselves to uphold truth and reconciliation in our own communities, and to remember and acknowledge the real damage and lives lost because of colonization of these lands. This damage can be seen through the Indian Act, the 60s scoop, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the truths being revealed about the residential school system in Canada. In order to move forward, we must acknowledge the past and present systemic inequities and the voices still missing from our conversations. I invite us now to take a few moments of silence to meditate on what these things mean to you. Because myself and Making the Shift are in Toronto, also known as Takaranto, we want to acknowledge that this land is covered by Treaty 13 and traditionally known as the Dish with One Spoon territory. Making the Shift resides on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So with that, welcome to the Making the Shift Youth Homelessness Prevention Awards. As someone who has also experienced youth homelessness and works in this field, I can say that a focus on prevention is not simple, but it is necessary to reduce the chronicity of homelessness not only happening, but recurring in young people's lives. Youth homelessness prevention is complicated and takes a systemic movement, and these awards are one way that we can thank our champions for helping to shift policy and practice by leading by example. And of course, we also have to thank our founding and presenting donor, Canada Life, for helping to make this possible. So we'll have a short message from them, and then I'll be back to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Adam Vaughn.
Hi, I'm Christy Bassick from Canada Life. Canada Life has deep roots in many communities across Canada and has a long history of supporting the elimination and prevention of homelessness. As part of that ongoing commitment, Canada Life has been a proud supporter of A Way Home since 2016 in their work to reimagine solutions to youth homelessness. Canada Life is pleased to be the founding and presenting donor for the new Making the Shift Youth Homelessness Prevention Awards, celebrating and showcasing the important work happening to prevent youth homelessness in Canada. Thank you to all the applicants who submitted entries and shared their work for this inaugural year. Huge congratulations to the winners. Your applications stood out above the rest. We thank you for your demonstration of prevention and action and dedication to young people across Canada. We can't wait to see how you inspire and create pathways for prevention work for community organizations across the country. Thank you to A Way Home Canada and the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness for bringing this award concept to fruition, with the aim to transform how we collectively respond to youth homelessness.
Amazing, great stuff. Thank you, Canada Life. So If you saw our event poster, you probably noticed that we have a few words from former Member of Parliament and Toronto City Councillor Adam Vaughn. I have a very small anecdote. A few years ago, in the pre-COVID world, he came to speak at one of my events, and I thought it would be cool to have a soundboard for special effects because that's before it was available at our fingertips. And this is not a good idea if you have sweaty hands, because instead of playing the final countdown, I played something to the effect of Doom, which is not what he is about. So this time, no sound effects, just a simple introduction. Adam Vaughn was first elected to the House of Commons as Member of Parliament in 2014 and has been a vocal champion of housing and homelessness throughout his time in politics. He's helped move forward the Rapid Housing Initiative and the National Housing Strategy, and had played a huge role locally within Toronto in both housing and our arts culture. Earlier this year, Mr. Vaughn announced he would not be seeking a fourth term in the House of Commons, but we are so happy to have him here today to say a few words. So now I will give the mic to Mr. Adam Vaughn. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. First of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm situated on, which of course is land governed by treaties with the Mississauga, but it's also been home traditionally to many different First Nations, but most importantly the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, and of course from across Turtle Island, in fact from around the world. People have gathered on the north shores of Lake Ontario to share good words, good deeds, to try to do better. And we have work to do to understand our past in more detail, but also to look forward together with greater hope and stronger partnership to make sure that the good words and good deeds are visited to everybody who resides in these territories. You know, I also acknowledge that we have people from British Columbia on the line today, and I have family there as well, sisters who live in BC, and there are really tough times underway with the flooding and other issues, but the flooding most importantly today as we speak, and we just hope that you're all safe and dry, and that your communities have the support they need to. A few things to say about homelessness and the campaign to end homelessness in this country once and for all. You know, the path forward is one that I think is an issue that we still are grappling with in many ways, but we don't need to. And I think that there are lessons to be learned as we come through the pandemic that will help us understand how to tackle this issue. For example, I'll give you a couple of thoughts on it. And as I said, this is my first speech, and I get to wear a T-shirt now, no suit and tie, to speak, and I'm comfortable in that. But I want to say a couple of things. When we all got sent home to protect our health effectively, it assumed we had a home, but it also forced us to adapt our homes to be safer places for everybody. And part of this process included these sorts of Zoom meetings and these social platforms to talk to each other, which is tricky because you don't get to actually be in a room with people and get feedback in a moment's notice when you're saying things. But the other thing was that our daily routines got changed, and our perception of daily routines changed, and the way in which we cared for each other changed. And so one of the things that we know about homelessness is how relentless it is. And I raise this now for a couple of reasons. We know, those of us who have worked in agencies, who have worked in public service, trying to get restore people's housing once they've lost it, that it's not uncommon to show up for work in the morning and have a person at the front door already waiting for help. And you can spend an entire day finding resources, unpacking that person's circumstances, unpacking the resources they have, the resources they need. You can spend an entire day getting to know them, understand their extended family if they have one. You can spend the entire day sourcing, if you're lucky, a place to live, a place to sleep that night. But you can spend an entire day with an individual and know them, more completely at the end of the day than you did at the start of the day, and go home exhausted, exhilarated, afraid, burnt out, only to come back to work the next day and find two people at the door. That's the relentless nature of homelessness, and it's part of the challenge all of us face in the sector as we try to end homelessness in Canada. And as I said, during the pandemic, there was we found ourselves in a different cycle, and part of that cycle, and certainly in my experience, I live in a house with 3 different generations, was what was for dinner that night. And it's the same sort of relentless march towards an end point, only to start all over again the minute it's finished. What's for dinner tonight? It involves a whole series of decisions and plans and resources that are very similar to the struggle we have with homelessness. It assumes you have a kitchen. It assumes you've done the shopping. It assumes you have a recipe and someone who can cook, and then you've got to start cleaning up, only to wake up the next morning and say, what's for dinner again? And sometimes there are more people to feed. And as you think about these things, they are symbolic of the very elements that we're trying to harness to end homelessness. Most obvious, of course, is the kitchen. If you don't have the kitchen, yeah, you can shop out and buy a fast food meal for a night. You don't get the nutrition, you don't get the safety, and you have nowhere to put the leftovers. You can pretend that you can eat raw food for the rest of your life, but the reality is that at a certain point, you've got to have the recipe, you've got to have the resources, you've got to have the plan, and you've got to have the financial capacity to execute dinner every single night. And it's the same for housing. And so as we start to take a look at the commitment to end homelessness in this country, we have to address all of the elements of making dinner every night. We have to have a plan. We have to have it properly financed. We need the housing for people to live in. And we need to make sure that the skill sets are there to prepare the food as much as we have to prepare our own lives for tomorrow and the next day after that. And I think that when we look at where the current federal policy and provincial and municipal policies and the nonprofit sector are at around these issues, we have elements of what we need, but we haven't tackled the issue which I think is most important, which is prevention. And when you're making dinner, you can't stop the persistent march of hunger. But when you're dealing with homelessness, prevention works. You can break that cycle of endless need, endless planning, endless searching for resources if you actually build the right kind of kitchen, the right kind of meal plan, serve the right kind of food, and have a shared responsibility about how you're going to do it again the next day so that it doesn't break down and find yourself in the position of needing food the day after you've cooked your dinner. And I think that the plan now to end chronic homelessness sits in front of us ready to be realized, and in particular when it comes to young people. Now, as I said, this is the first speech after politics, and I recall a story that my dad once told me about a guy called Marshall McLuhan. You might have heard of him. He lived around the corner, and one day he was in the backyard, and it was a Sunday afternoon. He suddenly realized he had to be in New York City to deliver a speech to the American Psychiatric Association. And my father said, how are you going to write a speech in 20 minutes and get to the airport? And he said, watch, I'll show you how I do it. And McLuhan took my dad to his study. And inside the study, there was one of those big wooden card catalog boxes. And the wooden card catalog box had every joke that McLuhan had ever heard ever in his life, put on 3x5 cards and put organized by subject matter. So he looked up P, went to psychiatrist, pulled a stack of 3x5 cards of psychiatry jokes, put in his pocket, and off he went to deliver the speech. And so I thought, and the reason he did this was that every time he ran out of something to say, he'd simply tell a joke. The audience would laugh, and while they were laughing, he would catch his breath, and he would go on to the next stream of consciousness, which is the way he spoke, much the way I'm doing right now, actually. And so I thought I'd try to do that today. And before I get into what I think is the meat of the speech, which is where we stand now and how we're going to end homelessness. And I just referenced the need for prevention. So I went online, not something I'd advise you to do, and looked up jokes, and there are jokes about the homeless online. And I came across one that I thought was absolutely apropos to today's conversation. The joke was, what do you call an orphan when they turn 18? And the punchline is homeless. And this explains entirely why, if we're going to end homelessness in this country, we need to focus on ending poverty for young people. Poverty of loss of family, poverty of loss of income, of loss of education, of shelter, of support, if we're going to end homelessness. And so as we turn our attention now, coming out of the pandemic, with a government that's signed on to an ambitious plan to end chronic homelessness in this country, but by that I think they really do mean end homelessness in this country, as it deepens and becomes before it becomes deeper and chronic. We have to focus in on prevention. And that requires us to rethink top to bottom our approach to supporting children in this country. But it also requires us to coordinate across different ministries, because homelessness is not just about building a kitchen or building a home. Homelessness is about building the support systems around that house, the process and planning, and the resources needed to make that housing successful. And so as we look at that experience of the relentless drive that the homelessness presents to us in terms of a challenge to be solved, and as we look at the planning and the work and the coordinated effort that's required to end chronic homelessness, let's take a look now, from my perspective, having left government, where government is positioned itself for this term of office for the next couple of years as it embraces this ambitious goal of ending homelessness. The joke matters because the joke directs us to a very important thing, which is prevention. We will not end homelessness if we don't also prevent it simultaneously, and that's why ending youth homelessness in particular, and the vulnerabilities that young people from across this country face, regardless of their backgrounds and the diversity of experiences, if we don't end chronic homelessness with young people, we'll never tackle the larger issue of chronic homelessness for everybody. So prevention is a really important part of the plan, and the move to reforming the child welfare system, in particular in Indigenous communities, is critical to it. The supports around income supports, so families are stable and have the ability to care for their own. The ability for families to find affordable housing, which is a key driver for all of the outcomes we're talking about here, are all critical. But we have to also understand that housing in of itself, just as the kitchen in of itself, won't solve the problem if you're hungry, and a house in of itself won't solve the problem for homelessness. And so we have 4 ministries now that I think are really critical to understand, and we have work to do to make sure those 4 ministries work together to achieve the analysis and the observations I've just presented. So first and foremost, we have a minister of housing. Maybe I retired too soon. Maybe they're waiting for me to leave so they could appoint somebody that, that wouldn't disagree with them so much. But Ahmed Hussein is now the minister of housing entirely. It's his focus. And in having a singular minister there, it elevates and focuses the work that minister can do around the cabinet table, and also allows that minister as a minister inside cabinet to start to coordinate with the other elements of the federal government that have got to come to the table around youth homelessness and around chronic homelessness. So it's great that he's there, and I'll say this for Ahmed. He's the person who challenged both myself and Minister Duclos and the government to rethink our commitment to end chronic homelessness under the National Housing Strategy by 50% and to eliminate it totally. It's Ahmed, and perhaps because Ahmed has lived experience that he can't tolerate it at all. He grew up as a refugee coming to Canada. He landed in public housing in Regent Park and started the process there as a young activist to revitalize that neighborhood in downtown Toronto, one of the largest and earliest housing projects in the history of public housing in this country. He is someone with lived experience who's not just at the table, he's leading the file nationally in this country. And that's critically important. He comes from a very, very challenged riding that generates a lot of homelessness, but doesn't have a lot of services for homeless individuals. And so he's uniquely positioned to lead this file, but he's got to tie into 3 other ministries if we're going to achieve in the next couple of years the ambition that we've set out for ourselves as a country. The first and most important one is the Ministry of Health. Housing, poverty puts people onto the street, but it's usually healthcare issues that keep you there. And if you're the child of a parent that's struggling with health issues and therefore struggling with income issues and struggling with housing precarity, the health supports are fundamental to stabilizing an environment and getting you back to better health, and therefore back to in a better position to care for your community and your family. So the health ministry matters. And what's important about the health ministry for this term is that the new Minister of Health is Jean-Yves Duclos, who's the minister who created the National Housing Strategy. He's the one I worked with way back when, before Canada re-entered as a government, the federal government re-entered the housing sphere with a great deal of investment. Jean-Yves Duclos understands the importance that housing has, not just to the social determinants of health, but to stability right across the board in terms of a person's life cycle. Jean-Yves Duclos is also an academic who has worked very, very in a very focused way on universal basic income. It's what his specialty was. It's what he taught when he was a professor in Quebec. And he understands the link between income insecurity, housing insecurity, and health outcomes. And so Jean-Yves Duclos is uniquely positioned to deliver the resources of the Canada Health Act and the budget of the federal government around health, which is a much bigger budget than it is for housing. He's uniquely positioned to partner that with the National Housing Strategy to create even stronger and better outcomes, in particular for families and young people, in particular for mothers who are often the first to lose housing and sometimes the hardest to rehouse. So Jean-Yves Duclos is at health. Carolyn Bennett, she has shifted across from Crown Relations and Indigenous Affairs back to where her natural strengths and her training should put her, which is in the health portfolio. She's a doctor. She rescued Women's College Hospital. She understands the need for people with lived experience to direct and manage and create their own healthcare systems. That's the tradition she emerges from before she enters politics. And she's been in particular put in charge of addiction and mental health supports as it relates to the federal health spending and federal health programming and negotiating with other orders of government, including Indigenous governments. That's important. Carolyn Bennett is also the politician that created the Public Health Agency of Canada. Social determinants of health are her bread and butter, effectively, if we're going to go back to a kitchen analogy. And so Carolyn Bennett's now in charge of that. And she knows that you cannot deal with addictions and you cannot strengthen people's mental health and you cannot deal with public health if you don't deal with housing and the social determinants of, that flow from housing precarity. She's got a new ministry, a new budget, a new mandate, and she's looking for things to do. And I think that this is an excellent opportunity to start to marry and bring together, to literally bake together the healthcare services that are critically needed in supportive housing for people of all ages, and the health and the housing system to create even better outcomes around housing. Think of rapid housing, 100% capital dollars, quick interventions to get people into safe, secure, affordable housing, partnered with mental health and addiction support services to stabilize people so they become more self-reliant, they become healthier, more and more productive in terms of the contributions they can make to other people's lives, their kids, their communities, their families, the country in general. So she's in that position. The third spot, which I think is fascinating, is Patty Hadju, who's now been assigned to Indigenous Services. Patty Hadju ran a homeless shelter in Thunder Bay. She is someone who understands exactly what happens when colonial systems and acts of parliament that are as flawed as the Indian Act is, when they don't serve the needs of people, when cracks are created in continuity of service, when government dictated dynamics put you on one side or the other side of the services, the support you need. She is uniquely positioned to understand what the fallout for that looks like in remote and rural communities. And she is now in charge of Indigenous services, including the provision of housing in Indigenous communities, both in terms of the modern treaties and the pre-existing treaties. And so this is a really important development as well. And then finally, when we take a look at the four, between public health, between Indigenous services with Patty Hadju, with Carolyn Bennett at addiction mental health, with Jean-Yves Duclos in the health department in general, and with Ahmed Hussein now in charge of homelessness, we have a quartet of ministers that effectively frame the challenges we've been facing as we try to end chronic homelessness in the country over the last 3 decades. And I think this is a really important opportunity for activists now to put these 4 seats around the cabinet table to work on this issue. And so you may hear me speaking as if I'm cheerleading for these 4. I think these 4 have to be pushed, and these 4 have to be brought to a collaborative understanding to work together to deliver the results we need to end chronic homelessness, and in particular to invest in prevention programs, and in particular to focus on reforms in the child welfare system to create the outcomes we need. And they do it with a deep understanding of the geographical challenges in this country, the colonial and racial challenges that many people and many organizations face in this country, the gendered impacts. They have a good worldview on this in terms of their past experiences, and I am very optimistic that if pushed in the right way, and if supported with parliamentary pressure in the right way, and if advocates are brought back to the table in ways that prioritize people lived experience guiding these 4 individuals, I think that we are in an absolutely unique position to solve this crisis once and for all. And so I'm very optimistic. It's maybe part of the reason why I felt comfortable leaving politics, but it's certainly given me optimism as I look forward to what my former colleagues are now tasked with accomplishing. But I'm going to say two last things again before departing from that. It's not going to work if all orders of government aren't pulling in the same direction, and all orders of government aren't focused on achieving the same things. For example, urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing challenges that fall outside the Indian Act, outside the treaties that have been signed, outside the federal framework that addresses a lot of Indigenous issues. We will not achieve an end to chronic homelessness if we don't address that issue in a very particular way. And that particular way, of course, is Indigenous-led, designed, and delivered housing programs, but it's also properly funded and properly supported independence for those for the new urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing program to realize its goals inside this context. And part of that involves challenging what housing programs need to do, and the scope of housing programs, of course, includes stronger child welfare supports, Indigenous-led, designed, and delivered to keep families and communities together. It of course includes as well rolling long-term care into the program to end chronic homelessness, and making sure that elders and young people cohabitate in community and live together in ways that traditional teachings show us to be most productive. We have to make sure that we bring to this conversation all orders of government in this country, and that means Indigenous, municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal. And if we can do that, we'll start to see some better results. But it also means we're going to have to keep our eye on some other issues which are generating homelessness. At the start, I talked about and acknowledged the challenges that are being faced in British Columbia, a community that this summer saw a whole town burned to the ground overnight. It's now watching a whole valley of people flooded out, and that water is moving downstream and will affect other people in the days ahead. We have got to understand that climate change is going to drive more people into homelessness than we can even start to calculate. It did it in Fort McMurray, did it in Lytton, and it's now doing it in Abbotsford and other parts of British Columbia, and it will do it as it continues to do in the Ottawa Valley, where people who were flooded out 2 years ago in Gatineau are still living in temporary shelter. Climate change is going to be as big a driver of homelessness over the next decade and years ahead as the failed child welfare system. And so we're going to have to get into adaptation and strategies around climate change, which lead us to be able to deliver new housing very quickly. We just lost effectively 7,000 homes over the last week in BC. You tell me whether BC can handle losing 7,000 homes before it builds 7,000 new ones. We have a challenge here. And so this is also an issue which we have to keep our eye on, and getting all orders of government to create resiliency and adaptive strategies, and to rehouse and create housing and accommodate new housing challenges on the horizon is going to be just as important as the issues I talked about with the 4 new ministers. And I think the other side of it is that we're going to have to think about the role that eliminating poverty plays in all of this. Our social service network was strained to the point of collapse during COVID. The unemployment insurance computer is literally held together with string and tape. They have to train people in COBOL to even operate it. It can't handle a flip to CERB, let alone to basic income. We're going to have to think through some of those issues around anti-poverty. But we're also going to have to make sure that things like food supply, again, challenged by, BC has lost half of its dairy production overnight, and the supply chain with the roads and the highway out. The rest of Canada is also going to be missing out on critical supply issues. We have got to keep an eye on what pressures those natural disasters now bring to the homelessness sector. And we have to make sure that as we rapidly rehouse middle-class people who are displaced, it doesn't push those that have even greater needs further and further down the chain of response. And so we have some headwinds that are coming from other sources that are not new to the homeless sector, but are in greater strengths and in far more vicious dynamics I think we've ever seen before. So I'm not going to end on a bad note. I'm going to end on a good note. I'm going to try and find some optimism in all this, beyond the fact that I think we have 4 good, strong ministers who are in a position to help. But I think the optimism that I'm going to draw on comes from the sector that I'm speaking to today. The group of people who have been working, in particular on homelessness as it relates to young people, but on the challenges that presents for anyone who works in the sector. Because, as I said, you know, as the joke unfortunately highlights, when you turn 18, you move from being a child in the child welfare system to being a homeless person in the housing system. And I think that you know, it's incumbent upon us all to continue to understand that. But I think that there's reason for optimism, and the optimism that I think is there to be seized and to be celebrated and championed, flows from how the sector responded to COVID. Every other country that had COVID before Canada, in numbers that Canada eventually saw but didn't see right at the start, if you turn your mind's eye back to Spain, Italy, to London, to even to New York City, the people in the nonprofit, many of you who are on the front lines, those that actually show up at work and find a person at the doorstep, and then spend the day finding folks homes. The work you did, the adaptability, the pivot, the innovation, the ability to translate health needs into health care, and health care into health outcomes, was astonishing. It was quite amazing. You did it putting your families at risk, putting yourselves at risk. You took people who are in the most vulnerable settings possible in this country, and literally nursed them through COVID with extraordinary skill and tenderness. It's skills you probably developed through the opioid crisis and through other challenges we faced in earlier times with other components of the healthcare system that collapsed and left people in a very difficult circumstance. But what it shows me is that there is great resiliency in the sector. That the people serving the homeless, as tired and as exhausted and as exasperated as you can be at sometimes, your resiliency is phenomenal, and it carried the population that you care for through this pandemic in ways that other communities in other parts of the world, we didn't have the same success. And that gives me reason to hope, because it means that your skill set is there, your dedication is there, your focus is there, and your compassion is there, and that gives me extraordinary optimism. But it also shows me something else that I thought was fantastic. You know, in the riding that I represented up the street from where I live, there were several parks that had encampments. And we saw new activists drawn to the issue to care for people in those encampments. Parks aren't great places to live. Tents are no place in the winter in Canada. But the reality is this: is that the community rallied around to support people and to continue to provide that support. Hopefully that support continues as we move to rapid housing and continues as we move to permanent new communities. The public wants to end this crisis, and the public is now engaged in ending this crisis. And you've got a sector that's skilled and compassionate and fearless, and you've got people with lived experience who are ready to lead. Time and time again, I just was at the Canadian Alliance on Homelessness conference by teleconference just last week. People with lived experience are getting better at correcting policy midstream, are getting better at raising their voices at the right time to get the right results, and their resiliency and their compassion for each other and their focus on survival still feeds the greatest amount of optimism that I can tap into. I am amazed to see young people move through the most extraordinary circumstances and come out the other end, leading organizations, leading conversations, leading policy design, and getting into government and getting into positions of authority so that programs are as effective as and as necessarily designed as possible. And I think that gives me the hope that this ambition and perhaps audacious plan to end chronic homelessness will be achieved, and will be achieved in particular for those that we need to work on the hardest, which is those that are yet to experience homelessness, the prevention policies, and in particular, of course, I'm talking about youth. So all the way around, from start to finish, we have challenges in front of us. We have got to address it as the crisis it is. We have to name it as such. We have to make sure that government organizations remain focused despite the distractions on eradicating homelessness in this country is something which people have to experience in a chronic nature or any nature. We have to insist that children in this country stop living in poverty and don't see their families torn apart by government policies that produce unintended consequences. And if we're going to do it, we're going to have to do it and be led by those who are being served by your organizations right now, those young people who are courageously combating the challenges in their lives and showing us that a better tomorrow is not only possible, but in fact is being realized by the good work that's being done here today. So I want to congratulate the organizers for celebrating the success of Best in Class. I want to thank the sponsors for helping to recognize the good work that people are doing. And in particular, I wanted to pay tribute to, as I said, all of you who have been on the front lines for the last year, whether through lived experience or serving agencies or through political organizing. You're showing us that a better tomorrow is possible because the better tomorrow is needed. And for that, I'm with you today and tomorrow and forever. Thank you very much.
That was so awesome. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn, for those words. I agree. This is a message of optimism and not doom. So thank you for getting us started. Thanks for getting the wheels cranking in the brain on this rainy day in Toronto. And we're going to move ahead with the agenda. I'm sure we're all feeling all types of anticipation. Who are these winners? So before I pass the mic, thank you so much, Mr. Vaughn. Before I pass the mic to Melanie and Steve, I want to take a moment to thank our adjudication panel members for their time and their insights. And to name those members, Cecile Arbat, Erin Dutch, Katrina Mullaney, Mike Golick, Sam Blondeau, Shannon Murphy, Sophia Ilniak, and David Phipps. These were our panel members, and we thank you so much for your time and adjudication. So now, without further ado, I will pass it to Melanie and Steve.
Thank you.
The reality is this: is that the community rallied around to support people and to continue to provide that support. Hopefully that support continues as we move to rapid housing and continues as we move to permanent new communities. The public wants to end this crisis, and the public is now engaged in ending this crisis. And you've got a sector that's skilled and compassionate and fearless, and you've got people with lived experience who are ready to lead. Time and time again, I just was at the Canadian Alliance on Homelessness conference by teleconference just last week. People with lived experience are getting better at correcting policy midstream, are getting better at raising their voices at the right time to get the right results, and their resiliency and their compassion for each other and their focus on survival still feeds the greatest amount of optimism that I can tap into. I am amazed to see young people move through the most extraordinary circumstances and come out the other end, leading organizations, leading conversations, leading policy design, and getting into government and getting into positions of authority so that programs are as effective as and as necessarily designed as possible. And I think that gives me the hope that this ambition and perhaps audacious plan to end chronic homelessness will be achieved, and will be achieved in particular for those that we need to work on the hardest, which is those that are yet to experience homelessness, the prevention policies, and in particular, of course, I'm talking about youth. So all the way around, from start to finish, we have challenges in front of us. We have got to address it as the crisis it is. We have to name it as such. We have to make sure that government organizations remain focused, despite the distractions, on eradicating homelessness in this country is something which people have to experience in a chronic nature or any nature. We have to insist that children in this country stop living in poverty and don't see their families torn apart by government policies that produce unintended consequences. And if we're going to do it, we're going to have to do it and be led by those who are being served by your organizations right now, those young people who are courageously combating the challenges in their lives and showing us that a better tomorrow is not only possible, but in fact is being realized by the good work that's being done here today. So I want to congratulate the organizers for celebrating the success of Best in Class. I want to thank the sponsors for helping to recognize the good work that people are doing. And in particular, I wanted to pay tribute to, as I said, all of you who have been on the front lines for the last year, whether through lived experience or serving agencies or through political organizing. You're showing us that a better tomorrow is possible, because the better tomorrow is needed. And for that, I'm with you today and tomorrow and forever. Thank you very much.
That was so awesome. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn, for those words. I agree. This is a message of optimism and not doom. So thank you for getting us started. Thanks for getting the wheels cranking in the brain on this rainy day in Toronto. And we're going to move ahead with the agenda. I'm sure we're all feeling all types of anticipation. Who are these winners? So before I pass the mic, thank you so much, Mr. Vaughn. Before I pass the mic to Melanie and Steve, I want to take a moment to thank our adjudication panel members for their time and their insights. And to name those members, Cecile Arbot, Erin Dutch, Katrina Mullaney, Mike Golick, Sam Blondeau, Shannon Murphy, Sophia Ilniak, and David Phipps. These were our panel members, and we thank you so much for your time and adjudication. So now, without further ado, I will pass it to Melanie and Steve.
Thank you.
So I'm very pleased to announce that the winner is Upstream Kelowna, BGC Okanagan. Though Upstream Kelowna is the winner under the Program Initiative category, it's incredibly collaborative. Upstream Kelowna is a preventative approach to youth homelessness and school disengagement, using a universal screening tool to identify school-aged youth who may be at risk before crisis hits. The student and their family are then connected to supports to build resilience and ensure overall well-being. Upstream Kelowna convenes local stakeholders to implement this collective impact project. The program's key services are an initial assessment of student risk and subsequent engagement of students at risk and wraparound case management or other supports that help the student and their families to reduce risk. Upstream Kelowna is part of something called the Upstream International Living Lab of practitioners and researchers from Canada, the US, Wales, and Australia who are engaged in shared learning around this innovative model that has its origins in Australia, formerly known as the Geelong Project. Personally, I'm so excited for the progress that Kelowna has made, and I know that many other communities across Canada and around the world are going to continue to learn from this important innovation. And now I'd like to turn it over to BGC Okanagan to say a few words.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you Making the Shift for hosting this wonderful event. What a great opportunity to highlight some of the great work that's happening here in Kelowna. I'd like to first also acknowledge that I am coming to you from the land and unceded territory on which I and our collaboration live, work, and love, and that is of the Syilx Okanagan people. Although we are navigating through natural disasters, I must recognize that I'm very blessed to carry out this important work on this beautiful land alongside our Indigenous communities. And as Melanie shared, like, we are a part of a larger national collaborative. We have these wonderful partners who've made it possible on our national level, including the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and Away Home Canada. We couldn't have even gotten started from the ground up if it wasn't for the signing on of our city, so the city of Kelowna and Journey Home. And thank you to Away Home Kelowna as well for getting us started. Of course, we need to recognize the partnership from the staff at School District 23 and our two demonstration sites at KLO Middle School and Spring Valley Middle. And I also would be remiss to leave out ARC Youth and Family Programs, the Bridge Youth and Family Services, the Foundry Kelowna, Kelowna Friendship Society, and my colleagues at BGC Okanagan that make up the partners in service to provide that frontline support to the young people identified by the assessment. I'm super, super proud of the work that we've done to date. I am amazed at the collaboration that has happened in order to build this project from the ground up. And I really, really look forward to the amount of impact that we might have as we start to expand our project. In the huge grand scope of things, I hope to work alongside of our partners to spread upstream to all the schools in our district. BGCO is a large organization in our region. We have 41 clubs across 16 communities. So ultimately, I would love to see us reach all the school districts within that community and start to shift our work from the front lines, from an intervention to a prevention way of doing our work, right? So we've worked collaboratively across sectors, so successfully as well, using youth serving agencies and working alongside our school district to start to communicate and break down those barriers and really facilitate in bridging gaps and advocating for changes that we can identify through the work that we're doing. I really am very grateful to this opportunity to be able to thank all of you for attending and all of you who are also co-winners in this award ceremony for doing the hard work that you're doing on the ground. Ultimately, we're all in this together, achieving the same goal. As for our more immediate goals for upstream, we really hope that in our next year, because we're only finishing our first pilot year in Kelowna, we are going to replicate the same service structure. So right now we're actually working with 2 schools, and we assessed 400 or approximately 400 students and connected approximately 50 of those students to coordinated supports to prevent them from experiencing homelessness or school disengagement ever in their future. By 2023, we hope to double our services and reach 2 more schools. So we'll assess up to 800 students. And yeah, so we hope to continue to just keep growing in that way and increase our impact as we do that. So that is kind of where we are hoping to go. I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity, not only to be here today, but to be in the position that I am as the Upstream Kelowna coordinator. I started on the front lines. I worked in the shelter. I ran a drop-in program for high-risk youth for many, many years. I'm very, very excited to be working on the other side of the fence and preventing those fires from happening in the first place. Yeah, I think that's it. So thank you so much for asking me to come here today, and thank you so much for recognizing the hard work. And I will thank you on behalf of all of our partners within the project.
Thank you so much. I have to tell you that I am so excited that Upstream won an award for the work they're doing. You've implemented the program model in a fantastic way and are achieving results. I think Upstream is the kind of program you could have in every community in the country. And if we did that, we'd be talking about youth homelessness as something in the past. One of the things you mentioned, Philly, was the importance of working collaboratively to get this job done, and that's absolutely true. And so I'm going to present the award for the Prevention Award that focuses on collaboration. And we have a really amazing example of this here that we'll want to keep an eye on going forward, because it's quite amazing what's being achieved. And what we're talking about here is the York Region Collaborative, led by 360 kids, that has put together a youth homelessness and housing stabilization strategy. And what's really unique is that it's working well beyond the homelessness sector to include different orders of government. York Region has regional government plus 9 municipal governments, businesses, public services, service providers, and young people with lived experience, to develop and implement a prevention-focused strategy. One of the exciting pieces here, which is a challenge in many places, is that both the York Regional District School Board and the York Regional Catholic District School Board are participants, and not just passive participants, but are actively engaged in recognizing that schools are key to helping us prevent and end youth homelessness. And so we've got really strong leadership here. You've got some real experience. And so it's with great pleasure that we offer up this award. Many of you have been working on this issue for a number of years. It was exciting to see before the event who's going to be speaking. So I'm going to hand it over now to Clovis Grant, who is the Executive Director of 360 Kids, to have some comments, and he's brought along, in the proper collaborative sense, some other people to share their insights on this great work. So congratulations to both winners here. Over to you, Clovis.
Okay, and thank you so much, Steve, for those words. And I will also say thank you to the many partners around the table here in York Region. We sit in at Treaty 13, and I'm so grateful for the many who form part of this collaborative. Really, this is about all of you, and without your partnership, this would certainly not be possible. 360 Kids is the backbone organization, but certainly the heart of what we do are the 30+ partners. We've been at this for about 2 years, and we spent that time developing our theory of change and building a collaborative working relationship with each other. And we're at the exciting point, not that to say that the first part wasn't exciting, but certainly we're at the point where we're now looking to implement some of these initiatives, and we have them bucketed in 5 key pillars. And those are leadership and collaboration, system barriers, looking at the structural barriers, addressing the issue of housing, and of course the early intervention and prevention work, where our work with the school boards is so critical. So I'm going to have a number of our partners now take some time to share, and I'll do that in this order. And if you can come on screen, that would be amazing. Elizabeth Mulligan from the URCAS, Children's Aid Society, followed by Farzana Peterson from the Roger White Academy, Yvonne Kelly, who's with the Social Planning Council of York Region, and Lolita Richards, who sits on our Youth Council, an amazing member of our Youth Council. So let's start off with Liz.
Thanks, Clovis, and thanks everyone for being here today. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the York Region Housing Stabilization Strategy to receive the Making the Shift Youth Homelessness Prevention Award. I think this is a good testament to all the hard work and passion that everybody from the community partners to the youth to community members that participate on the collaborative. York Region Children's Aid Society was very excited and eager to be a co-chair and to be a part of this initiative, given our work with youth in care who struggle to find appropriate and affordable housing once leaving care. This initiative is going to create resources and spaces to increase their housing options and to support them in ways that they haven't been supported in the past. So really looking forward to the work of the collaborative. It's broadened our understanding of the issues impacting stable housing for youth, and certainly has highlighted the need for a collective and a systems response. And certainly looking forward to the continued work that we have ahead of us. And I'll just hand it over to Farzana now to say a few words as well.
The group, through collaboration and cooperation, achieved a remarkable degree of unity of thought and prepared a guideline for recognizing the early signs of vulnerability, and inspired by the model of the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program of the Baha'i community and few other programs, is going to go into partnership with municipalities and is trying to establish a moral life skill program. I'll pass to Yvonne.
Thanks, Farzana. My name is Yvonne Kelly, and I'm fortunate to be involved in the strategy in 2 roles. I am the chair of the Social Planning Council of York Region, so this work is very important to us, as well as working with the York Region School Board in a community partnership capacity. In both of those capacities, I've been fortunate also to be involved in upstream approaches to youth homelessness alongside 360 Kids and others for the last 10 years in the region. The experience has been really unique because of the in-depth and breadth of the work, the involvement of all of the sectors that are serving youth, and the leadership of the young people with lived experience that I know Lolita is going to speak to. Taking a collective impact approach, as we've talked about many times, is not easy, but I'm convinced that it's the only way to make real sustaining change. And I'm excited to be involved specifically in the work to find housing solutions for young people. It does feel like we have a real opportunity with the strategy to support youth in York Region from a right to housing position, to dismantle systemic barriers that youth are facing, and to create some real momentum on the housing front here in the region. And I'd like to pass it on to Lolita.
Hello, everyone. So unfortunately, I'm unable to be on video, but hopefully you can all hear me. So the reason why I got involved in this work or this project is because my own experience with youth homelessness and knowing some of the difficult things that I went through, just wanted to use my experience and my voice to be able to help youth who might be experiencing the same thing. And of course, preventing these things from happening. And this experience has been an amazing one because not only did I feel like my voice was heard and received, but also very valued all throughout the way. And just knowing that such a negative experience for me can then turn around to go around and help so many others was really powerful for me, as well as the connection to such amazing and passionate people and youth organizations that I wouldn't have gotten to know if not for this experience. But also through this, I've been able to hone my own leadership skills. I've been able to create some opportunities for myself and further my own career interests through a lot of the connections that I've made. So all in all, one thing I've actually learned is to tackle big problems, you need a lot of passion and a lot of collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for the award.
Thank you, Clovis. That was fantastic. And here to Yvonne's shout out for the importance of taking a collective impact approach to work across systems and make real change. So finally, we would like to acknowledge an honorary mention emerging from the Making the Shift Youth Homelessness Prevention Awards. And that honorary mention is for TradeWorks, which is hosted by Blue Door. As the initiative has only just launched, the jury wanted to make sure and give it an honorary mention and highlight that it's one to watch. It's powered by the Home Depot Canada Foundation. It's a collaboration of 10 successful Canadian employment social enterprises, ESEs, helping bridge systemic gaps to prevent youth homelessness. TradeWorks partners provide youth at risk of homelessness with the skills training needed to secure a long-term and well-paying career in construction, resulting in the ability to afford and retain housing. But it's different from traditional employment training programs. These ESEs provide extensive wraparound supports throughout the program to address barriers and challenges that threaten to propel the youth into homelessness. The supports include wages and living allowances to prevent evictions, food programming, psychotherapy, childcare, transportation, and emergency assistance. Now I'd like to turn it over to Blue Door to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Thank you also, Canada Life, Adam, Vaughn, Steve, and Marty. First off, I would like to congratulate the winners of the awards and thank the Making the Shift team, Away Home Canada, and the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness for this honorable mention. This honor means a great deal to me, to the team at Blue Door, as well as the Home Depot Canada Foundation, who have thrown their full weight and investment behind TradeWorks in order to transform our response and prevent youth homelessness across Canada. I would also like to thank the members of our Blue Door team who have worked tirelessly to successfully set up Construct, Blue Door's trades-based employment social enterprise. Construct started in York Region 1 year ago with 2 cohorts and has since grown to offer 17 cohorts and expanded into Durham Region in Ontario. As well, special mention to the social enterprises Building Up in Toronto, Choices for Youth in St. John's, Community Builders in Barrie, The Raft in Niagara, Trade Links in Toronto, Quint in Saskatoon, Purpose Construction in Winnipeg, and NAWO in Camrose for being part of the Solution-Focused TradeWorks Coalition since April of this year. Through TradeWorks, our goal is to prevent and end youth homelessness by breaking down barriers to employment, providing skills training, and offering hands-on learning opportunities so that when a youth leaves the program, their graduation cap is replaced by a hard hat and they start a long-lasting and meaningful career in the trades. a career that lifts youth out of poverty and out of homelessness. While relatively new in Canada, social enterprises are a proven approach to ending and preventing homelessness, having led the way in confronting social marginalization and the development of policy and legal frameworks across the world. Going forward, the TradeWorks Coalition plans to broaden our reach to include more trades-based employment social enterprises across Canada, including growing into provinces that are not yet represented, to be responsive to each community's unique needs that will lead to increased labor market attachment for youth, the setup of training centers, and the building of more affordable housing by TradeWorks social enterprises. We are just at the beginning of this exciting journey, and TradeWorks will continue to grow this coordinated effort of social enterprises across Canada to offer clear pathways from unemployment and poverty to long-term, well-paying careers and housing stability for all. Thank you so much again for the honorable mention.
Thank you everyone for attending our event today. Thank you, Mr. Adam Vaughn, for joining us with some words of wisdom. And thank you, Melanie and Steve, for continuing your leadership in this space. Thanks so much to our winners, our adjudicators, and everyone who had a stake in this process. And thank you, folks in the audience, who I know play a crucial role every day in supporting the end of youth homelessness.